Well, I want to thank Frank this time for not making me directly follow the millennial conversation. Last time I did, and I really felt old as I walked to the stage and realized that generations had gone by and that there was lots for me to learn and continue to learn about how to manage in a new world. So speaking of managing in a new world, really this is about build, operate, transfers, kind of the theme of where I'm going to get you. But where I want to start is I want to start with this idea of disruption. An interesting last conversation is about disruption in your personal circumstances, but really what I want to talk about is disruption going on in terms of industry. And if you think back to just a few years ago, and companies that have succumbed or completely had to change their strategy given disruption in their marketplace, RIM, Kodak, Barnes & Noble, Blockbuster, right? Industries and businesses that at the time that we saw them, we thought they might stay around forever. But there was disruption. Were they paying attention to that? It's not just that type of disruption. It's the disruption brought about by other technologies that are changing the way that we operate and move. I don't know, show of hands, how many of you got to the hotel via Uber from the airport? All right, so that many people didn't take a taxi, which up until a few years ago would have been your preferred method if you didn't rent a car. And look at how that has changed for all of us and think about where those things are going. So those things continue to see evolution. I was watching a show just recently about the expected changes in New York City when it comes to car sharing, and the view that is being promulgated is one in which they will be able to eliminate millions of cars from the roads of the United States, and particularly in metropolitan areas like New York and Chicago, the idea of car sharing and those types of things that we see the beginnings of today are really disruptions. And where you know it changes, and this is a firm that may stay ahead of that curve, is GM invested $500 million in a car sharing service in order to figure out how they stay ahead of that disruption that's coming for their business. So, what do we know? If we've been in business for a little while and we know that the rate of change in each of our businesses is far outpacing how we typically react as organizations. Smaller, newer, more agile, more nimble firms have really taken a hold of different markets and brought about those kinds of changes. For those of us, I'll speak for myself, that have been in business a few more years, that you've having to continue to evolve to stay up with that rate of change and that kind of growth. So it's not just about evolving the technology. It's not about just evolving the products, but the rate and pace of change of the business model that supports what we're doing in order to bring that product or that service to market is really something that is evolving just as quickly. So the question, are we headed toward obsolescence? I was doing some research and I looked and there was 5 particular industries, but I just picked out these 3 that a lot of experts look at and say that because of the convergence of technology and robotic process automation and other types of influences that may be headed for obsolescence. So you think, well, what about the fully automated farm? What if you could just, with GPS and automated equipment, which is already there, they use the GPS to help navigate today, but the idea that they could just turn it on at the front of the field, let it run, and there would need to be no engagement, no people involved in that. How does that change the farming sector? What about learning? Right? If you're like my age, I have a college child, I pay a lot of money to put her through Penn State University. How does the availability of online and distance learning, how does those things change? And how, as we get in an environment where there's more and more capability for machine learning and that interactive type of education versus a static view of education, online courses, how does that change what happens in education, whether it's at the college level or even at the lower levels? And finally, what about media? If you think about this area, there's a lot of changes that are going on, but one of the things that I would point to is that Associated Press uses a platform called Wordsmith to publish over 3,000 financial reports every quarter. At some point, with machine learning and the growth of information that is available to our teams and our staffs in the computer industry? Is there a place at which that news reporting becomes something that can actually be done in an automated fashion? How does that change the media industry or the journalist role within it? So the title of this, as I was reviewing this morning, may not be the best way to phrase it, planning for obsolescence, but I guess if you're planning for obsolescence, you're looking at what are the things that could take me out, and then how do I react for them? I might have rephrased it if I had a few minutes. But there's really some key points. You've got to be agile. You've got to be adaptable. Right, you've got to look at it from a different kind of approach, end-to-end approach. Look outside of the traditional modes in which we as procurement and supply chain folks look. How are we able to influence our business? What's going on in the ecosystem that directly affects our business and beyond, looking for those things and planning and understanding that there is a competitive threat somewhere that could drive us toward that mode of obsolescence. So I just wanted to kind of drive that point home. Really is a brave new world. If you look at these 8 examples, companies that may have been stuck in an existing paradigm. If you think about, I mentioned Uber before, but if you look at Facebook, one of the largest media platforms, and they own none of the content. And yet think about how influential it is, not only in our personal lives, but in business today, as they look for means to use that as a platform in the proliferation of news. And we understand that, platforms such as Facebook or Twitter or some of these others are becoming such big influencers in terms of how next generation receives their news and how they process that information. And so what we've seen is that media companies have had to figure out how to react to that change in order to avoid that type of obsolescence. And there's some real interesting examples there, and I think we're probably familiar with all of them and probably use at some level all of them. So procurement as a change agent. This GEP white paper, it was talking about procurement in 2025, 5 megatrends and their implications. It really was focused on things that were going to impact procurement, but I also see them as things that are impacting business at a larger scale. There were 2 that really kind of aligned with what I was talking about and that struck me. And one was about a shift of external procurement focus, meaning looking outside, looking at the suppliers, and really then bringing that back, and a lot of companies have evolved there, but not everyone, to this mode of having a supply and operations management perspective. How do I, as a procurement and supply chain professional, operate in the mode of a much broader supply and operations perspective within my organization? I have that unique privilege. SDI, we are a supply chain management company, so I get to be the head of procurement in a supply chain management organization. That's all we're about. That's why we exist in large part. So it's really a unique opportunity versus being that procurement person inside of another type of manufacturing or service organization. The other one is about outsourcing and looking at those models. And we've all seen it around a number of different areas over the years. But this really, the GEP point was more about actually outsourcing portions of your procurement organization to unique and specific niche organizations that may be able to provide value that you are not able to do within your own organization. So is procurement ready to drive that kind of change? Traditional outsourcing, as we've mentioned it's been call centers, it's been technology environments, it's been help desks, it's been a lot of things over time. It's been certain of the HR functions. But we've learned it's not the be-all and end-all. We've learned it's not the solution to everything that we need to do and accomplish as an organization. And really what we've seen is there's a lot of win-lose environments. There's a lot of things that if you don't know, as is very cutely depicted by the dog, that will bite you, and it will be painful. And hopefully you'll learn lessons and it won't cost you too much along the way. But once outsourced, it can be a challenge to bring that function back in-house because there's things that we lose control over. We don't have the right staffing. Maybe we lose control of certain intellectual property. Or we just lose the appetite to have that budget now reside on our books as what we look at as a fixed cost versus a variable cost. So you've got all of those things that come into play in that environment. I want to switch gears for just one moment as I continue through, and this is part of what we see as an organization that largely supports the manufacturing industry, is really what you see here, right? We've had a bunch of different segments, and there's a growing view of a fourth industrial revolution, right? So the first ones were our ability to look at steam and water mechanical production. Then it was to do, how do we divide labor and how do we automate things, and through the second and the third. And now it's this cyber-physical systems. It's the ability of machines to learn. It's the adapt. It's the ability of all of this other information and technology to come together in something that's very unique and has implications, as we've seen, in very small pockets across almost every single industry. So what is that? That fourth industrial revolution is something that we really don't know how it's going to unfold. We don't know what the impacts of some of these changes are going to be, but we need to be prepared for them, and we need to be able to have a view that and a response that's completely integrated and comprehensive. It needs to involve stakeholders across our business and across our client base as well as our supply chain. So with all that, we could be looking like this guy, our head down, wondering what in the heck do we do now? Where do we go? Right? You've got disruptive change. You've got all kinds of new business models. You've got this fourth industrial revolution. So there's some responses. We could keep our head down and do nothing and hope for the best. We could build out new functionality, new capability internally. We could hire the people, develop the IP. We could do all the things that are needed to be done as organizations. We could outsource portions of it, trying to figure out where our sweet spots are and what we do well and what somebody else may do better, and look at those opportunities. Or because this is the subject of the conversation, I said we could build it in what's called a BOT, a build, operate, and transfer mode. So from our perspective, this is an area of opportunity, and we're an MRO organization. That's what we do. Status quo has a strong grip. This is a small part of spend, but a high impact to many organizations in terms of their capability to deliver products specifically, but also to deliver services in different environments. So what we see is all of these things. We've got a lot of relationships that we've got to deal with. We've got a lot of legacy issues. We've got low spend and seemingly unimportant things. Right? As procurement folks, we've seen this in various aspects of our business. Depends on what our organization looks like. So what do we talk about? So if we're going to advance that environment and we're going to look at it, it's really these three steps: that build, operate, transfer. We're going to look at the facility infrastructure, the process, the procedures, and the expertise. Something that's been, for us, been honed over 45 years as an organization. And then we're going to be able, and then we look at how we operate, stabilize, build in reliability, simplicity, and efficiency, and eventually move that back into your client. So this may be a way to accelerate the growth of a particular thing. And I think this kind of model can be applied to just about any area. In our area, it's MRO, but you could look at this and say, maybe I want to go out and build my capabilities and in how I manage my call center. But I don't want to grow it from the ground up. I don't like what I have today. I find an expert, I build it, my business is growing, I help them build out those things, and then I bring it back in-house, because to me, because of the importance of that in my business, I think it's a core competency that I ought to retain as an organization. Could apply to any part of that. So it really provides an opportunity to accelerate change and leverage existing expertise across the business. So how do we do it well? We have to have a clear vision of what we want our future organization model to be, and we have to have an in-depth understanding of that operational model. We've got to define what governance, and we've got to have it documented. Right? Simple things, but if you don't do them well, you're not going to be successful. So where am I going to leave that? So we've talked about the disruption in the market. We've talked about the accelerating rate of change. We've seen what's happened to different business and industries based on the implementation of new technology innovations, new thinking, and new approaches. So what we really need to do is find a balance. We need to find a balance from between our current and our future perspective when it looks at these things that we need to migrate, or we need to look at how we create value. So we need to look at relationships. We need to look at impact. We need to look at risk. We need to look at value to the business and spend, right? All those things that we're procurement folks, that's what we do every day. We've certainly expanded our vision over the last 25 or 30 years as a industry group and as a profession. And that's really what I wanted to talk about, was how do we bring all of those things together in the construct of what's happening in our world today from a technology and change perspective, from all of those things, and bring it into what might be something that we want to pursue as a different way of approaching a unique area within our business.